Imagine being the player who had everything it takes to become an NFL legend, only to see your career crumble in what seemed like the blink of an eye. Robert Griffin III, or RG3, came into the league with all the promise in the world, but his fall from grace was just as swift as his rise. So what really destroyed RG3's career? Was it just one injury, or something much deeper? Robert Griffin EE's story begins far from the Friday night lights of Texas high school football fields, in a place no one would expect, Okinawa, Japan. That's where RG3 was born, while his parents, Robert Griffin Jr. and Jacqueline, served as sergeants in the U.S. Army. For them, raising a son was about more than teaching right from wrong. They raised Robert with values rooted in military discipline and resilience, a mindset that would later shape him into the athlete he would become. The family moved constantly, from Japan to Fort Lewis in Washington to New Orleans, and finally to Copper's Cove, Texas. For Robert, each new place meant new challenges, a test to adapt and prove himself. Being a military kid wasn't always easy, but it taught him to push beyond his limits. Football wasn't his first sport. That honor went to track, where his speed and focus made him a prodigy. By 11th grade, Robert was already the #1 high school 400-meter hurdler in the United States. But for Robert, as much as he excelled on the track, football offered something more, a sport where his speed, strength, and mental toughness could be put to the ultimate test. As he took the field, it quickly became clear that Robert wasn't just another fast kid. He was a force of nature, the kind of player you don't forget. By his senior year, Robert Griffin III had earned his place as one of the most highly regarded high school athletes in Texas, a 4-star recruit and the 6th-ranked dual-threat quarterback in the country. Colleges across the nation took notice, and the offers poured in from major football programs. Tennessee, Nebraska, and others all wanted him. But in a move that surprised many, he chose to stay in Texas, committing to Baylor University, a school that wasn't a national powerhouse, but offered him something just as valuable: the chance to build something from the ground up. From the moment he set foot on campus, Robert stood out. He didn't just wait on the sidelines, hoping for his time to shine. He went straight into the action, starting 11 games and leading Baylor to a season of thrilling moments. For his efforts, he was named the Big 12 Offensive Freshman of the Year. Coaches, teammates, fans, everyone could see it. Robert wasn't just playing, he was already becoming a leader. But just as his career was gaining momentum, tragedy struck. In his sophomore year, RG3 suffered a torn ACL, devastating injury, one that can sideline an athlete for months or even end a career. Robert was only 20 years old, and in that moment, everything he'd worked for felt uncertain. This injury was a turning point, a test of the resilience his parents had instilled in him. The recovery was grueling. While his teammates took the field, Robert was in the shadows, facing hours of exhausting rehab, confronting the mental and physical pain that comes with wondering if he'd ever play at his full potential again. Every step, every exercise was a fight to reclaim his future. But quitting wasn't an option for RG3. This was a young man who had learned to adapt, to overcome, and this injury wouldn't define him. It would only make him stronger. In 2010, when he returned to Baylor, he came back with a vengeance. His resilience was on full display as he shattered Baylor's records for passing yards and touchdowns, proving to himself, his teammates, and his fans that he was back and better than ever. But the best was yet to come. His junior year was a season for the ages. Robert passed for over 4,200 yards, ran for nearly 700, and notched 47 touchdowns. Baylor, a team that had long struggled, suddenly became a force to be reckoned with. With his mix of speed, arm strength, and a fearless playing style, he led Baylor to victory after victory, taking down highly ranked teams and electrifying the nation. Sports analysts marveled at his skill, calling him one of the most talented players they'd ever seen. His presence on the field was magnetic, drawing fans and media attention with every game. Then, in December 2011, Robert achieved a lifelong dream. He won the Heisman Trophy, awarded to the best player in college football. Standing on that stage, holding the famous bronze statue, RG3 had achieved more than individual glory. He had lifted Baylor into the national spotlight, and given hope to a school that hadn't seen a football star in years. For Robert, the Heisman wasn't just a trophy, it was a symbol of everything he'd overcome. The moves, the doubters, and the devastating injury that nearly derailed his career. In that moment, he was the pride of Baylor, the pride of Texas, and a hero to everyone who'd been told they weren't good enough. Winning the Heisman was proof that resilience could conquer even the greatest of obstacles. But Robert's ambitions didn't end there. His eyes were set on the NFL, a place where only the best survived. He was ready for the next chapter, prepared to take on a league where every moment counts, where heroes rise and fall in a single play. And ARG3 was ready to become one of the NFL's next great stars. At Baylor, Robert Griffin III wasn't just good, he was spectacular. In an era when college football was filled with rising stars, ARG3 became the brightest of them all. By 2011, his junior year, he wasn't just leading Baylor's offense, he was transforming it, giving fans a reason to believe their team could reach new heights. That season, Griffin's stats were nothing short of extraordinary. He threw for over 4,200 yards, completed 37 touchdown passes, and ran circles around defenses with his unmatched speed. But these numbers, as impressive as they were, only tell part of the story. Every play he made lit up stadiums and drew national attention. He wasn't just a quarterback, he was a force that couldn't be ignored. Baylor was no longer just another team in the Big 12. Under ARG3's leadership, they'd become a contender, a program that other teams feared, one that the national media couldn't stop talking about. Every game became a showcase of ARG3's talent, a new chapter in his story of grit, resilience, and undeniable talent. For Baylor, Griffin represented something more than wins and stats. He embodied hope and transformation. The fans saw in him someone who could finally give them a reason to hold their heads high. Baylor hadn't been in the national spotlight for years, and yet, here was this young man who made everything seem possible. The energy in the stadium was electric every time he took the field. It was the kind of magic that made you hold your breath, waiting for the next unbelievable play, and Griffin delivered again and again. Each pass, each sprint was a message. Baylor had arrived, and ARG3 was the reason. Then, in December 2011, all his hard work, every grueling hour spent in recovery and training, paid off. Robert Griffin III won the Heisman Trophy. As he stood on that stage, holding the iconic bronze statue, he wasn't just a college quarterback, he was a national hero, a symbol of perseverance and talent, a beacon of hope for every underdog. The moment was surreal, a culmination of all the blood, sweat, and tears he'd poured into the game. This wasn't just a win for Baylor, it was a win for everyone who doubted him, for everyone who'd told him he couldn't make it. He'd taken Baylor from the shadows to the spotlight, and for that, he would forever be a part of college football history. For ARG3, the Heisman wasn't just an award, it was the realization of a dream that had once seemed almost impossible. He'd overcome a devastating injury, defied expectations, and silenced every doubter. He'd shown the world that talent and heart could conquer even the greatest challenges. Standing there, ARG3 was the pride of Texas, the pride of every fan who had followed his journey, and the pride of every young athlete who dreamed of making it big. And yet, this moment of triumph was only the beginning. The NFL loomed on the horizon, a world where legends were made, but where the cost of greatness was steep. As ARG3 declared for the NFL draft, his name became one of the most discussed topics in football. Teams knew he wasn't just talented, he was transformational. And in the 2012 draft, Washington would do anything to make him their quarterback. The Washington Redskins were desperate for a player who could change their fortunes, and they believed ARG3 was that player. Their belief in him ran so deep that they made a huge gamble, trading away multiple draft picks, 3 first-round picks and a second-round pick, to move up to the second overall position and select Griffin. This wasn't just an investment, it was a statement. Washington was telling the world that ARG3 was their future, that they were willing to give up nearly everything to have him. With the draft behind him, Robert Griffin III had officially arrived in the NFL. He was no longer just a college phenomenon, he was the face of a franchise, the man who would carry the hopes of an entire city on his shoulders. The expectations were immense. Fans in Washington were hungry for success, for a team they could rally behind. They wanted a savior, a leader, someone who could bring them back to greatness. And RG3, with all his skill, charisma, and determination, seemed to be that savior. As the season approached, the excitement was palpable. The media couldn't stop talking about him, comparing him to legends, predicting that he could be one of the greatest dual-threat quarterbacks the league had ever seen. Every fan in Washington was ready to believe that RG3 could take them to new heights, that he could be the quarterback to finally deliver them a championship. But as much as there was hope, there was also pressure. Pressure to perform. Pressure to prove himself in a league where even the smallest mistake could have lasting consequences. RG3 had already shown he could handle adversity, but the NFL was a different arena altogether. It was a place where every decision was scrutinized, every pass analyzed, every play a potential turning point in a player's career. And for RG3, the stakes were higher than ever. The weight of Washington's dreams now rested on his shoulders. The Heisman had been his crowning achievement in college, but the NFL was an entirely different level, a stage where only the strongest would survive. Robert Griffin III was ready to take on the challenge, to step into the spotlight and prove that he was more than just a college star. He was ready to show that he could become one of the NFL's greats. But no one, least of all Griffin himself, could foresee the challenges that awaited him, the highs and lows that would soon test him in ways he'd never imagined. In his heart, RG3 carried the hopes of Baylor, the pride of his family, and the dreams of every Washington fan who believed in him. The journey to the NFL had been long and full of obstacles, but it was only the beginning of a story that would captivate millions. A story of greatness, resilience, and ultimately, a story that would show just how unforgiving the road to NFL glory could be. From the very first game, Robert Griffin III made it clear he wasn't just another rookie quarterback. He was a game changer. The day he debuted for Washington, RG3 faced off against the New Orleans Saints in one of the NFL's toughest environments, the Superdome, home to one of the loudest and most passionate fan bases in football. Many rookies might have crumbled under that kind of pressure, but not Robert. He played like he had been there for years, with a calm that belied his age. When the game ended, RG3 had delivered one of the most spectacular rookie debuts the league had ever seen. He threw for over 300 yards, completed 2 touchdowns, and walked away with a win. The NFL world took notice. Here was a young quarterback not only playing well but thriving in the spotlight. For his performance, he was awarded NFC Offensive Player of the Week, the first rookie quarterback in history to earn that honor in his debut game. And just like that, RG3 was a household name. The hype around RG3 exploded. He was suddenly the talk of every sports show, the focus of articles and analysis, with fans and experts marveling at his unique skill set. His speed, accuracy, and calm presence on the field seemed almost unreal. Washington had finally found a reason to believe again. For fans who had endured years of disappointment, RG3 was more than just a quarterback. He was a savior. The fans embraced him, filling the stadium with chants, wearing his jersey, and carrying the kind of hope they hadn't felt in years. Under the guidance of head coach Mike Shanahan, Washington's offense was built around Griffin's dynamic skill set. Shanahan, a seasoned coach known for his ability to adapt, had crafted a system designed to unleash RG3's full potential. Instead of sticking with traditional plays, Shanahan integrated the read option, something rarely seen in the NFL at that time. This was a move that sent shockwaves through the league. Defenses simply didn't know how to handle it. Griffin would take the snap, read the defensive end, and either hand the ball off to his running back or keep it himself. The play was so effective that defenses were left guessing, torn between focusing on RG3's passing or his ability to explode down the field with his blazing speed. Week after week, RG3 didn't just live up to the expectations, he exceeded them. Every Sunday, he brought an energy to the field that left fans and critics alike in awe. His poise was incredible, his decision-making precise, and his resilience unshakable. He wasn't just running the offense, he was redefining what it meant to be a quarterback in the modern NFL. Griffin led Washington to win after win, including unforgettable victories against division rivals like the Dallas Cowboys and New York Giants. With each game, the team's record improved, and Washington inched closer to something they hadn't tasted in years, a playoff spot. But it wasn't just the victories that made RG3 special. It was his playstyle, fearless, electric, and relentless. He ran the ball like a running back, taking hits that would make most quarterbacks think twice. His combination of speed and vision made him a constant threat. Fans watched in amazement as he sliced through defenses, often leaving linebackers and cornerbacks grasping at thin air. He played with a freedom and confidence that felt almost supernatural, as if he were invincible. Yet, as thrilling as it was to watch RG3 in action, there was a price for his style of play. Week after week, the hits started to add up. While fans and coaches admired his toughness, there was also a sense of worry beginning to grow. Griffin wasn't sliding to avoid hits. He wasn't stepping out of bounds when he had the chance. He was taking every tackle, every collision, as if he had something to prove. And in a league as brutal as the NFL, this kind of play was dangerous. The team and the fans started to hold their breath every time he took off running, knowing that each hit could be the one that changed everything. But for RG3, stopping wasn't an option. He was determined to keep fighting, to keep pushing Washington toward the playoffs. And then, in December, it happened. In a game against the Baltimore Ravens, with just a minute and 50 seconds left on the clock, RG3 took off on a run, pushing forward with everything he had. But instead of sliding, he stayed on his feet, determined to gain every possible yard. The hit that followed was brutal. His knee twisted in a way it shouldn't have, and as he struggled to his feet, it was clear something was wrong. Washington's hopes seemed to hang in the balance as Griffin limped to the sideline, clutching his knee. But RG3 wasn't ready to give up. Against the advice of medical staff, he convinced head coach Mike Shanahan that he could keep playing. And incredibly, he went back onto the field, leading his team with a determination that stunned everyone watching. His courage was undeniable, but so was the cost. Griffin's knee was damaged, and each snap, each movement, only made it worse. In that moment, it became painfully clear. RG3's commitment to his team was absolute, but his body was paying the price. Despite the injury, RG3 returned to finish the season. With sheer grit, he led Washington to 7 consecutive wins and secured the NFC East title. The stadium erupted, fans celebrated, and RG3 was crowned the NFL Offensive Rookie of the Year. It seemed like nothing could stand in his way. He was more than just a star, he was a symbol of hope. A player who'd put everything on the line for his team, his city, and his fans. But beneath the surface, RG3's story was starting to shift. The injury he'd sustained against Baltimore was worse than anyone realized, and with each game, his knee grew weaker. As Washington prepared for their playoff game against the Seattle Seahawks, there was a sense of unease. Doctors were concerned, but Griffin was determined to play. He wanted to be there for his team, to give everything he had, even if it meant risking his future. The stakes were high, and RG3 felt the weight of every fan's hopes and dreams on his shoulders. He wasn't just playing to win, he was playing to prove he could overcome anything. But as the playoffs loomed, so did the toll of RG3's unforgettable rookie season. He'd given Washington everything, but the cost of that sacrifice was about to become painfully clear. After the devastating end to his rookie season and a tumultuous second year, Robert Griffin III was no longer the NFL's golden boy. The league, his coaches, and even the fans who once celebrated him had shifted their expectations. But RG3 wasn't ready to give up on his dreams. He returned in 2014, determined to prove himself, to reclaim the greatness that had defined him only 2 years before. Yet, for every ounce of determination he poured into his comeback, the weight of past injuries, broken trust, and fractured confidence weighed him down. The 2014 season started with a glimmer of hope. RG3 entered training camp in perhaps the best shape since his rookie year, and he'd spent the offseason working tirelessly on his mechanics. He wanted to adapt to the pocket, to become a player who could last in the league. But the underlying truth remained. He wasn't the same RG3 who had electrified Washington's fans. His signature mobility was gone, and every snap he took as a pocket passer seemed to remind him and everyone watching that he'd been forced to leave a part of himself behind on that fateful playoff field against Seattle. In the second game of the season, that hope took yet another blow. In an attempt to extend a play, RG3 scrambled to the sideline, diving to avoid a tackle. But as he landed, his ankle twisted sharply beneath him, dislocating in a way that made fans wince. He lay there on the turf, clutching his ankle, and the familiar sight of RG3 in pain hit fans hard. Once again, Washington's star quarterback was taken out, sidelined by yet another injury. For Griffin, it was more than physical pain, it was a psychological blow that reopened every wound from his rookie season. After weeks of rehab, RG3 returned to the field, but his performance was far from the superstar form he had once shown. Each game was a battle not just against his opponents, but against the reality that his body couldn't handle the game in the same way it once had. His agility, his explosiveness, the qualities that had made him such a threat were now shadows of what they'd been. He completed the season, but his numbers were underwhelming, and Washington finished with another losing record. By the end of the season, even the organization had begun to lose faith in him. The whispers grew louder. Was it time to move on from RG3? The following offseason, the team brought in a new head coach, Jay Gruden. Gruden was clear in his evaluation of RG3, stating that he didn't see Griffin as a long-term solution if he couldn't adapt to the new offense. This wasn't the same Washington organization that had once traded away multiple first-round picks to draft him. Now they were cautiously reevaluating their future, and RG3 was no longer the cornerstone. Gruden's offense emphasized quick decisions and precise passing, elements that clashed with Griffin's strengths and highlighted his struggles to adjust. The friction between them grew, and so did the pressure on RG3. As the 2015 season approached, the pressure was unbearable. Griffin had gone from a beloved rookie sensation to a quarterback fighting to keep his job. He played sparingly that season, relegated to the bench behind Kirk Cousins. The fans who had once chanted his name now cheered for Cousins, who was thriving in Gruden's system. Sitting on the sidelines, RG3 watched as Cousins led Washington to the playoffs, achieving what had once been his dream. The chants, the celebrations, the cheers that had once been his were now directed at someone else. The franchise that had once believed so wholeheartedly in him had moved on, and Griffin was left to confront the painful truth that his time in Washington was ending. By the end of the season, it was official. Washington released Robert Griffin III. The player who had once given hope to an entire city was now without a team, his future uncertain. The reality hit him hard. Just a few years ago, he'd been one of the most promising young quarterbacks in the league, a player many believed would become a legend. Now he was a free agent, the label draft bust looming over him. For RG3, the emotional toll was immense. The injuries, the conflicts with coaches, and the constant cycle of hope and heartbreak had left him drained, physically and mentally. Yet, even in the face of all he'd lost, Griffin refused to give up. In 2016, he signed with the Cleveland Browns, determined to make one last comeback. But the weight of everything he'd endured followed him. The Browns, a team struggling with their own issues, hoped Griffin could reignite his career and give them a chance at turning things around. But his time in Cleveland was short-lived. In his first game with the Browns, RG3 took yet another hard hit, fracturing his shoulder. It was another cruel twist in a career that had already been marred by one injury after another. He returned to play a handful of games later in the season, but it was clear that the magic was gone. The burst of speed, the confidence, the fire that had once driven him to greatness had faded, leaving only the remnants of a player who had once captivated the entire NFL. The Cleveland experiment ended, and once again, RG found himself without a team. He had given everything to keep his dream alive, but with each season, his body seemed to betray him further. At this point, RG3 faced a choice: accept that his career might be over or keep fighting, hoping that somewhere, somehow, another team would give him a chance. He chose the latter, signing with the Baltimore Ravens in 2018 as a backup. For Griffin, it wasn't about being the star anymore. It was about staying in the game he loved. Even if his role was now from the sidelines, he accepted the position with humility, becoming a mentor to younger players and embracing a role that was worlds away from the stardom he'd once known. For 2 seasons, RG3 remained with the Ravens, watching from the sidelines as Lamar Jackson, a quarterback who, in many ways, resembled the young RG3, took the league by storm. Griffin saw in Jackson a player with the same kind of explosive ability he'd once had, the same promise that he'd brought to Washington all those years ago. In Jackson, Griffin saw a reflection of his younger self and perhaps a sense of redemption. He played occasionally, stepping in when needed, but his days as a starting quarterback were behind him. By 2020, RG3's NFL journey seemed to be winding down. He had gone from a superstar to a mentor, from a franchise player to a backup, from the face of a city's dreams to a story of what might have been. For fans, his career is one of the great what-ifs in NFL history. What if he hadn't pushed himself to play through the pain in 2012? What if the team had protected him better? What if he'd been given more time to adapt, to heal, to grow? For Robert Griffin III, the journey has been one of both triumph and loss. He tasted greatness, reached the highest peaks, and became a beacon of hope for an entire city. But he also experienced the harshest side of professional football: the injuries, the criticism, the painful reality that sometimes even the greatest talents can be cut down by forces beyond their control. In the end, RG3's story is one of resilience. Even when everything seemed lost, he found a way to stay in the game, to remain a part of the sport that had given him so much and taken just as much in return. And perhaps, as he looks back on his career, he knows that while he may not have ended up where he dreamed, he gave everything he had to the game, leaving behind a legacy of heart, courage, and unbreakable will. Robert Griffin's career in the NFL ended in a way he never could have imagined. A story that had once seemed destined for greatness had turned into one of the league's most tragic what-ifs. For RG3, the dream had always been clear: to become an NFL legend, to inspire generations, and to show that talent and heart could overcome anything. But the reality of his journey forced him to confront a truth far more complicated and, ultimately, far more human. In the end, RG3 gave everything he had to the game. He played through pain, through doubt, through broken bones and torn ligaments. Each injury left a scar, not only on his body but on his spirit. The moments that should have been his proudest to playoff berth, the chants of his name, a city rallying behind him, were all tinged with the looming shadow of what he was sacrificing to keep that dream alive. For a player who embodied hope and resilience, the path was often more heartbreak than glory. As he looks back on his career, there's no doubt RG3 has had time to reflect on the choices he made and the pressures he faced. The decision to keep playing through his injuries in 2012, the choice that set the tone for the rest of his career, is one that continues to haunt him. He wanted to be the hero, to be the player who led Washington to victory. But in choosing to push through the pain, he made a sacrifice that his body couldn't sustain. And that decision, born out of a fierce desire to give his all, became the very thing that took everything away from him. There's a saying in the NFL: next man up. The league is built on the idea that no one player is bigger than the game, that for every star, there's someone waiting to take their place. For RG3, this reality hit hard. He had entered the NFL as a generational talent, a player Washington had staked its future on. But when the injuries piled up and his performance waned, the same league that had celebrated him was quick to move on, to look for the next bright star. And perhaps the most painful lesson for RG3 was realizing that the NFL doesn't wait for anyone, not even for someone with a heart as big as his. Still, his impact lingers. RG3's story isn't just one of talent and triumph. It's a story of grit, of fighting through adversity, and of never giving up, even when the world seems to have turned its back. He may not have achieved the career he envisioned, but he inspired countless fans and young athletes along the way. His rookie season remains one of the most electrifying performances in recent NFL memory. a reminder of the incredible potential he once held. For Washington fans, he'll always be remembered for that one magical year, a year when everything felt possible. Today, RG3's career serves as a cautionary tale for players, teams, and fans alike. It's a story that asks hard questions. How much should a player be willing to sacrifice for the game? What role should coaches, doctors, and team owners play in protecting their players? And at what point does the drive to succeed become self-destructive? These are questions that ARG3's journey brings to the forefront. He was a player who gave everything to the game: his time, his body, his future. And for that, he paid a price most will never understand. But while many may view his career as a tragic fall from grace, perhaps RG3 sees it differently. Even in the toughest moments, he kept going. When he could have walked away, he fought to stay in the league. When his body told him no, his heart told him yes. He wasn't just playing football. He was fighting for a dream he'd held since he was a child. A dream he wasn't ready to let go of, even when it seemed hopeless. For the fans who watched him, for the young players who saw themselves in him, RG3 will always be more than his stats or his injuries. He represents resilience, the refusal to give up in the face of overwhelming odds. And while his career didn't end with the records and championships he'd envisioned, his legacy goes beyond the numbers. ARG3's journey reminds us all that greatness isn't just about success, it's about heart, about sacrifice, and about the courage to keep going, no matter the outcome. Robert Griffin III may not have become the legend he dreamed of, but he became something else, a symbol of perseverance, of hope, and of the bittersweet beauty of chasing a dream with everything you have. And perhaps, in the end, that is the most meaningful legacy of all.